I've always loved studying the world's history, from ancient civilizations and the things they did to impact the world as we know it today, to modern history and the things we've accomplished. But with all the accomplishments we've achieved and all the good we've managed to do, it's matched, if not exceeded, by failures and all the evil that we've done to one another. The worst of those events would happen in our era of history, when Nazi Germany would invade Poland and set into motion not only World War II, but the near and complete annihilation of an entire race of people. This event would become known as the Holocaust, where Adolf Hitler and his Nazis would commit mass genocide on the Jewish people, murdering an approximate 6 million European Jews, along with an additional 5 million other victims that he deemed unworthy for his vision. Today's story is about a girl and her allies who would strike back and fight for their people. This is the story of Roza Robota and the great Sonderkommando Revolt. Roza was born in 1921 to a middle-class family. Her brother and sister all lived together with their parents in the city of Chisinau. Chisinau is a city located in north-central Poland, and before the liquidation of the Chisinau ghetto, was home to a large Jewish community of 1,800 people. Roza and her family would live what was a normal life during this time, and she would eventually become part of the Hashmir Hatzir youth movement with many other youth in her town. This movement was an ideological circle that studied Zionism, socialism, and Jewish history. In 1939, Roza and her family's lives would be changed forever, when Nazi Germany would invade Poland on September 1st, ushering in an age of tyranny for the people of Poland, especially those of Jewish descent. Chisinau would be captured on the 3rd or 4th of September, and with that, a resistance would be created by the youth movement named the Jewish Underground, in which Roza would join in resisting the Nazi occupation. In 1942, just over 2 years since the invasion began, Roza and her family would be forced from their home and deported from Chisinau, just like they've seen happen to so many families before them. They would be forced onto what is now known as a Holocaust train, which were railway transports used by Nazi Germany and their allies for the purpose of forcible deportation of Jews, as well as other victims of the Holocaust, to Nazi concentration, forced labor, and extermination camps. These trains would pull freight cars that were 32 foot long and 11.5 foot wide, that were only able to hold about 50 people, but the Nazis would routinely double these numbers, resulting in many deaths before the train would even reach its destination. After a terrifyingly long journey in which Roza and her family did not know if they would even survive, they would watch the train car doors slide open and finally reveal their final destination, which was the Auschwitz concentration camp. Auschwitz was the worst extermination camps built by the Nazis in German-occupied Poland. It operated from May of 1940 to January of 1945. An estimated 1.1 million people were murdered there, with 90% being of Jewish descent, taken off the train and immediately sent into the selection process, where prisoners were sent either into forced labor or directly to their deaths. Roza would be the only one of her family to survive this process. She would initially be held in the women's prison in Auschwitz I, before being relocated to Birkenau, which was the extermination camp within Auschwitz, also known as Auschwitz II, when the women's prison was relocated in August of 1942. Roza would be placed in the clothing labor unit, where her and other women would sort through the personal belongings of the dead. Over time, she would attain a high status at this post, as well as form and organize a rebel group within her unit. Roza would eventually make contact with the Jewish underground working within the camp, which worked in the complex bordering Crematorium No. 4, which was the home of the Sonderkommando. The Sonderkommando were work units made up of Nazi death camp prisoners. They were composed of prisoners who were usually Jews, who were forced on the threat of their own deaths to aid with the disposal of gas chamber victims during the Holocaust. Sometime in 1943, A message would come to Roza from the Jewish underground in Auschwitz I, requesting that she help organize the smuggling of explosives from the Wischel Union metalwork to members of the Jewish underground and to the Sonderkommando leaders. The metalwork was a munitions factory located in the industrial area between Auschwitz I and Birkenau, where detonators for artillery shells were manufactured. The plan was to get the Sonderkommando enough explosives to destroy the gas chambers and the crematoriums and start an uprising. Roza would come into contact with three other Jewish women, Alla, Regina, and Esther, who all worked in the section of the factory responsible for producing gunpowder, where all the laborers were Jewish women. Alla, Regina, and Esther, along with 20 other women who were all between the ages of 18 and 22, such as Hanley, who was Esther's sister, Faye, Mala, and Hadassah, along with others whose names are unknown, would all take part in this operation. Several male prisoners, Yehuda, Israel, and Noah, would also be involved in transferring the material. The women would smuggle the explosives at a tremendous risk to themselves in matchboxes and other creative ways, such as hiding the gunpowder in small bits of cloth on their body and by using the false bottoms that they had created in their shoes. When Roza would receive the material, she would then pass it along to the Sonderkommando, who would then transport the material from inside the camp in a wagon used to move the bodies of those who died the night before. They would hide the material under the bodies and then conceal them inside the crematorium. This process would continue for a year and a half until the morning of October 7th, 1944, when the Sonderkommando would receive word from the resistance that the Nazis planned to kill off the current squad of Sonderkommandos and replace them with a new generation of prisoners. During an afternoon roll call, one of the prisoners would walk calmly up to a guard with a hammer in hand, and with a mighty hurrah, he would strike the officer, initiating the start of the great Sonderkommando revolt. What followed was chaos, as the SS found themselves attacked on all sides by prisoners wielding hammers, knives, and homemade explosives. According to one account, one SS guard known for his extreme sadism was thrown into a crematorium oven alive. Some of the prisoners also cut their way through the barbed wire to flee into the woods while the SS opened fire with machine guns on them. The uprising was brief, but for the Sonderkommando it was a delicious taste of vengeance. They had killed 3 SS men, injured around a dozen more, and managed to destroy a gas chamber and a crematorium. But to no surprise, the Nazis would crush the revolt. The Nazis would kill 250 prisoners during the fight that day, as well as recapturing the escapees and killing them. For those who did not die during the uprising, 200 would later be forced to strip and lie face down before being shot in the back of the head. A total of 451 Sonderkommandos were killed that day. In the aftermath of the revolt, the Gestapo, who were the secret police of Nazi Germany, would begin an investigation of the incident, and roughly 3 days after the revolt, on either the 9th of October or the 10th, the investigation would lead them to Alla, Regina, and Esther. These 3 women would be arrested and brought in for interrogation, and they would be brutally tortured, but neither one would utter a word, keeping the identities of their comrades a secret. After several weeks of torture and interrogation, they would be released and sent back to work at the factory. The Gestapo, knowing that the 3 women were lying to them, would bring in an undercover agent named Eugene Koch, who was a half-Jewish man from Czechoslovakia, to purposely head one of the squads in the factory. Eugene would discover the names of 4 women responsible for the smuggling, leading to the rearrest of Alla, Regina, and Esther, and the arrest of Roza. The Jewish underground in the camp was gripped by fear, in particular due to the arrest of Roza, who knew not only the names of many members of the resistance, especially the inner circle, but also some of their methods of operation, due to her stature among them. Although the 4 women were brutally tortured, They would never divulge any information about the revolt or the Jewish underground. One night, after persuading a capo who was guarding the torture bunker to let him in to visit Roza, Noah, who was a member of the resistance from the same city as her, was able to bring back a message from her to the resistance. Noah would enter Roza's cell, and this is what he would say. I entered Roza's cell. On the cold cement lay a figure like a heap of rags. At the sound of the door opening, she turned her face to me. Then she spoke her last words. She told me that she had not betrayed anyone. She wished to tell her comrades that they had nothing to fear. We must carry on. It was easier for her to die knowing that our actions would continue. It was a pity to lose one's life and have to leave this world, but she did not regret her actions. She was not sorry that it was her lot to die. I received from her a note for the comrades outside. It was signed with the exhortation Hazak v Amatz, which means be strong and of good courage. The time came to leave, and I left the bunker. This was the last time I saw Roza face to face, but I will never forget her. On January 6, 1945, Roza, Alla, Esther, and Regina would be murdered by hanging in front of the other women who worked in the factory. The Nazis would do it in two phases, hanging Esther and Regina during the morning roll call, and then at night they would hang Roza and Alla. During their final moments, these four brave women would cry out for vengeance and sing the Hatikva national anthem before being murdered. When Roza was murdered, she was only between the age of 23 and 24 years old. Their murders would be the last execution in Auschwitz. On January 27, 1945, 3 weeks after their lives were stolen from them, the Soviet Union would march on Auschwitz and liberate nearly 7,000 prisoners. The four women's heroic stand is remembered as one of the most courageous acts of Jewish women imprisoned in Auschwitz. The Great Sonderkommando Revolt would not be the only time that the Jewish people would stand up and strike back at their oppressors. Other major revolts would take place in the camps of Treblinka and Sobibor, as well as other smaller insurrections and escapes that would happen throughout the course of the war. While the Holocaust is the worst event to happen in our known history, time shows many events where a fellow human fueled by malice, anger, and hatred will do evil upon others. Although not on this level that we know of, evil acts like this still happen today. If you made it to the end of the story, I really hope you enjoyed it. Please leave a like and subscribe and share with anyone else that you think may like this video. Until next time.